The Prime Minister will be talking tough, and he's not the only one. The Deputy Prime Minister as well. Here's one headline: Raab promises, as in Dominic, Raab promises final say on human rights to top British judges. Raab to rip up the nonsensical Human Rights Act is another one. Well, let's put that to the very man himself. Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister, in the studio, LBC studio at Manchester with me. Why don't you like the Human Rights Act, Mr Raab? Good morning.
Well, do you know what? I'm pro-human rights, but I would like to see greater, stronger protections for quintessentially British freedoms, like the freedom of expression that we've seen come under assault just this week, or in recent weeks, with Rosie Duffield not able to attend the Labour Party conference out of fear that she will be harassed. So that's a good example of a right that I'd like to see strengthened. But I do also think that the abuse of human rights, particularly, for example, by foreign national offenders using the right to family life to trump the public interest in deportation, is something we can address. And I think fundamentally, I also want to make sure that the elected prerogatives of Parliament, which is the way that your listeners' will and views are properly reflected, are not overridden by elastic interpretation of rights that are extended by judges without democratic oversight. Those are probably the two biggest, if you like, prongs of reform.
Now, many of my listeners will be cheering at the radio as they hear this, Deputy Prime Minister, but they'll also be saying, come on, I've heard this before. Why are you going to be any different this time?
Well, back in 2015, 2016, we prepared a plan on this, a consultation. It needs to be updated. We're a few years on. But the basic fundamental grounds for it remain the same. There are still too many foreign national offenders trumping deportation orders on, I think, poor grounds. I gave a very clear example yesterday in the hall.
Is this the man who hadn't paid maintenance?
This is the guy who, let's be clear, was a convicted drug offender. He hadn't paid maintenance to his daughter. He'd beaten his ex-partner, and I think it's crazy that someone who's guilty and convicted of domestic abuse then claims the right to family life to avoid this country's interest in deporting him. That's the kind of thing I think we should have stronger democratic oversight, and we can reform.
As well as Deputy Prime Minister, you're the Justice Secretary. Are you going to try and... The Conservatives are always known as the party of law and order. Many critics would say that's slipped quite a long way. Are you the man who's going to bring that back?
Look, I'm working very closely with the Home Secretary. We will do it. We've already recruited half of the 20,000 extra police officers. We've got an issue with, after the pandemic, with the Crown Court backlog. We're going to get a grip on that with the super courts, the Nightingale courts. And I can tell you that in relation to the magistrates' courts, which are 85% of criminal cases, we've got the backlog down by 14%, notwithstanding the pandemic. And I think, of course, for many of your listeners as well, there's all of the issues arising out of the Sarah Everard case. Yes. And you heard what the Home Secretary said, but from my point of view, when I look at the criminal justice system, at every stage, we want to drive forward the energy and the capacity to get more of those cases where women are reporting sexual violence, even rape. We want to get the prosecution, the volume of those cases and the number of convictions up.
You mentioned the Sarah Everard case, and we know, well, there are two inquiries now. There's the Met's own one, and there's the one that your colleague Priti Patel spoke of yesterday. But will they be different from the inquiries that were reported in 2012 and 2016 on the same subject? They won't be any different.
Well, the Home Secretary's review has got two stages. First of all, it's going to look at how Wayne Couzens got to the position that he was in, notwithstanding some of the warning signs that were clearly flagged. How does that happen? That's very particular to this case. The second phase, if you like, is looking at what are the broader systemic issues and lessons that need to be learned, including challenging the culture within the police, which is something I know has been raised in the debate since the case and the sentence.
Yes, but it's not a statutory inquiry, doesn't it? It doesn't have the powers to compel people to give evidence. Many people are saying it should, it needs to be. Some are even saying we need a royal commission, but let's stop short of that. This inquiry, ordered by your colleague, needs to have statutory powers to compel people to appear.
I don't think that's the case. I think we've had many good inquiries that have got to the truth, learnt lessons in the past. Of course, I think what a lot of particularly women, but our society as a whole want to see is swift action. And a royal commission, a statutory-based inquiry would be much more long and drawn out.
But it would get result. I mean, respectfully, I'd point you to the Daniel Morgan inquiry, which the judge who conducted it said that at times she felt the Metropolitan Police withheld information that they were not able to get at. We don't need a repeat of that in the Sarah. I know this isn't actually your brief. I know I should be addressing this to the Home Secretary. I get it. But you are the Justice Secretary. This needs teeth, Justice Secretary.
We're confident that the review that the Home
Well, I'm
Secretary...
confident I'm going to have a turkey for Christmas. It doesn't mean I'm going to have a turkey for Christmas, does it? We need teeth.
I'm confident both that you will get your turkey and that the Home Secretary's review, and she's a pretty robust individual, and clearly as a woman as well as someone that cares passionately about our justice system, is going to get to the bottom of this. And I'll work with her and do everything I can to make sure we resolve this issue. And of course, the issue with violence against women and girls goes much more broadly. There's systemic questions, and they affect the whole of the criminal justice system, from the police, the reporting of crimes, through to the Crown Prosecution Service, and then what happens in court. And we will take an overarching look at the whole issue, break it down bit by bit, and make sure we're doing everything we can, not just to deal with the issue, but to increase women's confidence that they are listened to and that they get justice.
Should misogyny be a crime, Justice Secretary?
I think the things people are talking about are already criminal offences under the Public Order Act, and therefore, rather than create new legislative offences where there are already a sufficient criminal base, our focus ought to be on solving the problem. The problem is one of enforcement, not that there isn't enough law.
What do you mean by that? Why is it a problem to enforce it?
Well, if you think of the kind of things people are talking about, harassment, intimidation, verbal abuse in the streets, all of those things are already criminal. They've already been criminalised as already statutory or other offences. The problem we've got is them being enforced robustly, vigorously, consistently enough. So we've seen this time and time again throughout the Blair years, the attempt to legislate to deal with what is actually an enforcement problem or deficit. So we need to focus on dealing with the problem, because that's the only way you'll give, I think, women and the rest of your listeners confidence that we're actually dealing with the problem. It is an enforcement problem, not a legislative gap.
Can the same be said of the Insulate Britain protesters, otherwise known as the irresponsible crusties, who are stopping M25 and Blackwall Tunnel and others? Is it again an enforcement problem? What's happening there? Exactly. Again, I know it's on your colleague Priti Patel's brief.
Well, no, it's a team effort. Priti and I work very closely together. It's both. So we're going to increase the sentence, unlimited fine, custodial sentence for those that, for example, with the M25 or any other motorway, paralyse commuters, passengers, people engaged in public transport. They're not trying to exercise freedom of expression. They're trying to disrupt and effectively sabotage the public going about their already business. We're going to increase the penalties for that.
Your Deputy Prime Minister, today is the day that the temporary uplift in universal credit is ended. People are saying that it will make a real difference. Some charities are even saying people might lose their lives. Are you absolutely committed that this was the right decision?
The universal credit uplift was always going to be temporary. It was to deal with the problem during the pandemic. We've supported 14 million jobs with furlough throughout this pandemic. We can't keep relying on the level of support. We've had £400 billion state support to see the economy, workers, the most vulnerable, through this pandemic. And yes, I understand the point you're making about UC, but at the same time, we've got close to £5 billion now being invested through the Kickstart and the Restart scheme to help those that are reliant on benefits or at risk of long-term unemployment get back into work. With jobs rising, vacancies rising, real wages rising, that must be the right long-term sustainable plan.
But it could be heat or eat for many people, Deputy Prime Minister.
I don't think that's right, because we have the targeted support.
But they're saying it is, Deputy Prime Minister.
Look, we'll always have vigorous debates about this. That's only right. But if you look at the bespoke support that's being provided, including through local authorities who know the vulnerable members of their communities very well, coupled with the support for the economy, we've got the right balance between encouraging those into work who can work, but also making sure that the welfare safety net is there for those who need it.
Last couple of questions, because I know you've got to go somewhere else. Everyone's saying Christmas, including the Prime Minister, this Christmas will be better than last Christmas. Do you share that confidence?
Absolutely, and I think you can feel it.
What's it based on? People aren't, I'm coming back to it, but people are fearful of getting their turkeys and their Brussels sprouts.
I base it on the fact that we've got the joint highest economic growth in the G7 as we come through this pandemic. Real wages, so over and above inflation, are rising by 6% on the latest annualised data. More jobs. You can feel it on the high streets. I can certainly feel it in the high streets across Esher and Morton constituency, but also where I go. And I think also credit to not just the vaccine rollout, but the fact that we've got the booster jabs to see us through autumn and the colder months.
The Prime Minister is going to talk, we understand, about business at parts relying too much on immigration, cheap labour. Were some businesses hooked on cheap labour?
I think we had a period. Obviously, when we were in the EU, there was free movement from the EU. and if you like, an instinctive, reflexive resort to reliance on the cheap drug or the addiction of low-skilled labour from abroad. Our vision for our economy is to build on the jobs creation that we've seen in recent years, but to make sure we've got a high-skill, high-wage economy, because we know for those on lower middle incomes, that's important in making sure that they can not just deal with the cost of living, but have a high quality of life.
Lastly, we've referenced a couple of your colleagues, the Prime Minister, Priti Patel, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss. It was in the papers that the two of you are trying to get your hands on the Grace and Favour House in Kent, Chevening House. Whose is it?
I've not spent even a minute looking at this. I'm getting on with the job.
You don't want it?
Look, this is something that will be resolved, but I've literally not given it a minute's thought.
So you're not interested in it? I can tell Ms Truss that she's hers to have.
You could tell Liz whatever you like. She's a great friend.
Dominic Raab appearing here on LBC, where the time